Welcome to my brand new podcast. You are listening to the things nobody tells you about with Marthy Cherubin. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the second part of my labor story. To tell the story, I enlisted the help of the A team. The A team, like my doula called it, consisted of my husband, two of my sisters, and my doula as the team leader. I checked in with my A team to find out what they remembered from that day. However, due to time constraints, I am going to be talking to my husband and two of my sisters. We woke up the next morning when my primary OBGYN walked in the room. At that point, after that very traumatic night, I think that maybe I've slept 2 hours, and I don't think my husband had slept at all. He said that he was stopping by to check in on me and see how far along my cervix has dilated. After he checked, he said that I was only dilated 1 centimeters. Therefore, he's probably going to do a C-section. Before he left, he said that he will come back in an hour to check my progress. When the doctor mentioned the C-section, it bothered me a lot that he said that, because for the past 9 months, I have been telling him that I would prefer very much to have a natural birth without medication and avoid the C-section if possible. So the fact that he had just came in and one of the first things that came out of his mouth was he wants to do a C-section. When he came back an hour later, I was dilated 3 centimeters. It seems like my labor was progressing. However, he still mentioned C-section. From what the nurses and the doctor himself had told me, my baby is not under duress, I'm not under duress, and my heart is stable, the baby's heart is stable right now, and everything is doing okay. So I'm thinking, if everything is okay right now, why don't you give me a chance to try to have that baby naturally before you already decided that I needed a C-section? Couple of hours later, I was dilated even more. Yet, he still said that he wanted to do a C-section. Now, mentioning C-section like once or twice to me would be okay, but he kept asking me every time he walks in the room. Every single time.
You know what? Maybe this is a bad comparison, but it reminds me of like that story in the Bible where Jesus is in the desert for like 40 days and 40 nights, and every once in a while the devil keeps coming in to tempt him.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah. What do you remember about that, Stephanie?
What I remember, that doctor was, if anything, persistent. Like around the clock, it was just, dude, go away. Like literally, it was, oh my God.
In my doctor's office, we have 3 OBGYNs. There is a main OBGYN that I see, then I alternate between the other 2. The reason for that is in case I go into labor, at least one of them will be available to help me deliver the baby. So around 3 o'clock that day, one of the female OBGYNs came in. She checked my cervix and told me that I was dilated 7 centimeters. She said, "This is great. If you're dilated 7 centimeters, you can easily make it to 10. You're doing great. You can do this." It felt like she was a ray of hope because throughout my whole labor, I was dilating. My baby and I were stable, yet the primary OBGYN just kept pressuring me to do a C-section. And in addition to him pressuring me, I only had about a couple of hours of sleep. The last time I ate was almost 24 hours ago. I was in terrible, shocking, excruciating pain. They were starving me. I couldn't even have water. I was only allowed ice chips, just a little bit of it. I had no pain medication. And the only thing that kept me going, that gave me just enough energy to keep going through my contractions and my labor, was the 3 or 4 pieces of nuts that my doula had snuck in for me to eat, because I wasn't allowed to eat anything whatsoever, even though I was literally starving. So when she came in, she was so supportive that it gave me renewed strength. I felt like, wow, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can actually have this baby on my own.
It was almost like he would come in each time and it was like, had enough, Marthy? You kind of would come back at him like just completely composed and or centered. It just was amazing to me to witness this because I was like, wow, she's been at this for hours now and she still is well mannered and centered and composed. And it was just fascinating also, I think, to witness because you're kind of like suffering, you're in labor and you're in all this pain and you have this person that just keeps coming in and challenging you and like sort of tempting you to take the easy way out. And each time you would hear him out and then just tell him no, just in a very composed way that you just didn't want to do it that way. The whole nursing staff was like on the edge of their seats, like, like it's like a movie with popcorn, like what's going to happen? How is this going to end?
Because very few instances they see. I think it's just
Yes.
the culture of it. Like usually the doctor says one thing and that's it without considering what the patient wants. And I do respect that, understand that they're medical professionals, yes. But at the same time, not every mother the same, not every labor is the same. It always has to come where what the mother wants and what's medical necessary. The doctor was a real good doctor, obviously. I think he just had very poor bedside manners. It was just the way about, like, he came in to shoot like information, but not considering,
Yes.
as if every instant he came, as if it was the first time he was telling you something like this. Of course, Marthy wanted, if it was, emergency, yes. But if she could deliver safely, that was the plan.
Yes.
And then if it was way beginning, I think the doctor had made up his mind, even though Marthy was dilated. It's just like he wasn't budging. A doctor like that, you should be planning and partnering with your patient, not just making those arbitrary decisions.
Well, unfortunately, it is the way it is in healthcare. Marty, once you were allergic to pitocin, that was a red flag for them. They don't want, no matter what you do, they already make up their mind. That was the red flag for them because you're allergic at the beginning of your contraction.
Yeah. To just go back on what you said, Marka, about, the medical profession, how they are. Like, I feel like the C-section become like standardized. And then C-section is a emergency procedure and it's serious.
That's what it's supposed to be.
Exactly. And just, it's the safest compared to, if the baby's heart rate dropping low to a dangerous level. I get that, but we didn't get to that point in the decision to have a C-section was already determined. I think that's what I have a problem with. Patients have rights and they should be a part of that decision making. It shouldn't just be the doctor. So the doctor should partnering with the patient. So it was just like they got used to that. Yeah, C-section. I don't know if it's just like a money thing with the insurance.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But it was just that mentality that was behind it.
There's sometimes the doctor go and take easy way out. They have many reasons why they do that. Maybe because they're afraid to get lawsuit,
Yeah.
or they have so many complexity about why they want to have C-section more often.
I understand
Yes.
complexities. However, there was no need for the doctor to stress me out throughout the whole thing. Maybe he knew from the beginning that I was going to need a C-section, or he wanted to do a C-section. But you know what though? I wanted to have this. This is my first child. This is my first experience. That should matter. He could have worked with me, but he had no interest in doing that, even though it was completely possible for him to do it.
It's sort of like this theme that just keeps coming to mind for me is that women's bodies are not their own, or women's bodies, it's like they don't belong to them, even though like
Exactly.
obviously they do, but it's sort of like that's the attitude. I don't know if it's like a cultural thing or a medical thing, but that just keeps coming to my mind, and I was like, I thought I should say it.
That's a great point because I was very determined to have the baby as naturally and safely as possible. However, it felt like the doctor had no interest in letting me or allow me to fulfill a goal that could very well be achieved or realized. Maybe it was inconvenient for him, so he was doing everything in his power to prevent me from doing it. Or at least that's what it felt like. But I was determined to have as much autonomy over my body and my choices as safely and realistically as possible.
Marty, unfortunately, in America healthcare system, the doctor doesn't bother to stay like of the patient less than 5 minutes. That's the system.
Even though
Yes,
they're like
that's
that,
all.
you have to advocate for yourself. You push it. They can't tell you no. You have your
Exactly.
rights. They assume that you don't know. You'll be intimidated. That's why they're using that tactic on you, Marky, how they did.
Well, I
But
wasn't
you
intimidated, so.
exactly. And they're so used to that. And yeah, you've been trained to spend 5 minutes with me and bill me for like 3 hours, but you're not gonna spend only 5 minutes with me. You're gonna spend as many time that I need you within that, a lot of time that I deserve. So I
I made
think,
him work
yeah,
for that money.
Yeah.
Yeah, because most of the time they don't have no manners, like especially the doctor nowadays. Maybe back in the 50s, maybe the doctor more about the patient care.
I
Then
disagree with
nowadays
that,
they don't.
Marka. Just because that's what they do, we shouldn't accept that as patients. And
Of
like you're
course.
saying, Eddie, just to jump for a little bit, I think the idea, like the women's body, is just it seems like the doctor has even more rights over it. You're a doctor, a professional, but that's still my body. What my wishes should be considered within that medical clinical judgment that you were providing me with.
You guys,
Absolutely. And I think that was the fascinating battle between the doctor and the patient that the nurses were experiencing and they were in awe of. This
yes,
doctor
and
is also extremely strong-minded, strong-willed doctor. And I was an
Yes, it
extremely
was.
strong-willed and strong-minded patient. So we went at it. But
yeah,
but
and
I did it in a very calm and respectful way. Like,
That you
forget
did.
it.
like when we started out, it was just us and the doula. And by the end of the day, it was like us, the doula, and like a whole bunch of nurses. It was sort of like Marthy was kind of taking a stand for women, like in general, like all
Hmm.
women that have been through this, had this experience. And most of them, maybe like 99.9% of the time, they just go and do what the doctor says. And maybe they wind up regretting it later. I don't know. But there was just this community of support that had formed around Marthy, where it's like all of the nurses that had started out just watching in the hall had like sort of slowly like come into the room. And it
That's
was like
true.
a community. I remember towards the very end, there was like a whole community of women in the room that were like, just on standby to get to advise you. And that's eventually what
What I
I
did,
think.
actually. I was so frustrated that towards the end of my labor, when my contractions were so high that I literally yelled and screamed at him. I was like, let me think, please stop talking to me. It was the first time throughout my very long, exhausting, and painful labor that I lost my patience with the doctor. At that point, I had already dilated 9 or 10 centimeters. My water broke. There was meconium in my water. The baby's heart rate had dropped. And I was also ready to start pushing the baby out. So everything was happening at once. Meconium is the early stool passed by a newborn soon after birth before the baby starts to feed and digest milk or formula. In some cases, which was also true in my case, the baby passes meconium while still inside the uterus. This can happen when babies are under stress due to a decrease in blood and oxygen supply. If the baby breathes in this fluid into the lungs, they might develop something they call meconium aspiration syndrome. It refers to breathing problems that a newborn baby may have. So, when my doctor asked me for the umpteenth time to do a C-section, I just yelled at him. Not because I thought he was wrong to ask my permission to perform a C-section at that time. I just needed a minute to think. I turned to my nurse, who's been there with me since the beginning. She was so good. She was very involved and supportive throughout my whole labor. She also understood the gravity of the situation and understood my case. I turned to her, I looked at her, and I think she knew what I was trying to do, what I was asking her. And then she came up close and said, right now, yes, you do need it. And I said, thank you. My doula was also very helpful at that moment when everybody was trying to tell me what to do, because at that point there were a lot of people in the room. She came close and got everybody to quiet down and asked me, honey, what would you like to do? I said, yes, I want to have the C-section. And everybody was like, yay!
I think the doctor just was like, whoo-hoo, like jump in the air or something.
I know, he probably did a split.
Yeah.
It's so useful to have a doula with you. Not only they're a great advocate, but they're a great support. And that's why she came in closely. She was like, let her make her decision. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't pushing. She wasn't pressuring. And she's a very experienced doula. So let me give a shout out to my doula right here. Her name is Stephanie Pasternak. So I have a lot of Stephanie in my family. And I think her name was also one of the reasons I picked her, but she also was awesome. So it was a full package. In addition to my husband, she was the only other person who was allowed in the surgery room. Another very cool, awesome thing that she also did was she took tons of pictures. I have so many beautiful pictures. She took pictures throughout my labor, delivery, and of my baby. 2 hours later, after my water broke, I delivered via C-section a beautiful, healthy baby boy.
Marthy, so just to sum up, like what would you recommend, let's say, going into labor in terms of like a women, especially for first-time mothers? What would you recommend?
Well, I think for first-time mothers and also other mothers, I think labor is such a scary and unpredictable thing. And I think it's always so important to have support with you. It could be one, it could be two. I was lucky enough to have a whole team of people in the room with me, and I'm forever grateful for that. However, if you can find a way to find one person to come in with you And that's going to be your advocate while you're there. Because when you're going through labor and all the pain, it's hard to think straight when you are like in excruciating pain. And I also would recommend a doula. And make sure that you find a good one and experienced one too. I think experience matters. And you need to find yourself a doula if you can afford to, or have a support person there with you in the room. And make sure also to you speak up. And if you cannot speak up, make sure that whoever that support person is can speak up for you. So that's really what I would recommend, because even if you had a baby before, each labor and pregnancies are different. So you don't know what's going to happen. Your body might react differently than it did the first time. So it's always good to come prepared and bring backup. Thank you all for having this lively, interesting walk down the memory lane with me today. So thank you so much for your participation and help. At this time, I'd like to encourage all of my listeners to leave a review of this episode on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you're listening to this podcast. You can also leave a comment about your pregnancy stories, so please join us.